Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and welcome to episode 199. And on this week's episode of the podcast, I am, of course, going to be reviewing Michael, the Michael Jackson biopic that had the biggest opening weekend of any biopic of all time. So say what you will about what the critics had to say. Clearly, the audiences wanted to go see it. And as this is a film and TV podcast, I'm going to be giving you my opinion on this latest biopic. As this is a feature film review, there will be a non-spoiler review as well as a full spoiler review. Times will be listed in the description should you feel the need to hop around. And then to end the show, I will be responding to listener mail and question of the week responses. Let's moonwalk right into non-spoilers with Michael Review.
Q, can you lower the lights for me, please?
Okay, but remember, in here, keep those feet still, my man.
Before getting started with the review, I wanted to address, obviously there is controversy, substantial amount, around Michael Jackson the human being, as has there been for the last 30 years, whether that was the legal cases or the documentaries that investigated his relationship with children. And I understand if you boycotted the film by not seeing it or don't want people to see it. I understand that perspective. However, I am purely looking at what this is as a movie. The irony is that they were going to address some of that in the original idea for this film, but then had to remove it because of legal reasons. So we got a different third act in the movie that we actually did wind up seeing. So I just wanted to address that elephant in the room because it is worth acknowledging that I am aware that certain fans of cinema and of the movies have an opinion because of Michael Jackson and the very mixed reception to his personal life in the last 30 years. That's completely understandable, but I'm purely evaluating the movie that I saw in front of me. Now, what's incredibly funny about the movie is that they are marketing it as the director of Training Day, Antoine Fuqua, and the producer from Bohemian Rhapsody. And the best place to start is in this idea of what we got from Bohemian Rhapsody, because that is a movie, of course, that had a lot of controversy in its own right. Bryan Singer originally directed it until he disappeared, and it was finished by Dexter Fletcher, who would direct his own biopic, but that was of Elton John and a much more positively reviewed film. It is interesting to connect to a biopic that in its own right had controversy, but it's important to remember the kind of movie that Bohemian Rhapsody was. But biopics in general are maybe some of the hardest real-world dramas to make, specifically when we are looking at very popular pop culture icons. We know these people, so much information is given about them. There are documentaries, insights into their creative process. And Bohemian Rhapsody, in my opinion, is a mess. That movie, of course, as I said, switched directors, but it's unfortunate that in a band as popular as Queen, we wound up very barely getting to know the intricacies and getting to understand them as people, when it's more fun, and I understand this perspective, to show the band and give us a surface level exploration of the creation of their songs and meticulously recreate some of their most iconic moments. It wound up winning Rami Malek an Oscar for his performance as Freddie Mercury, and that's the last I'm going to say on him winning an Oscar, because the Academy is what they are when it comes to portraying real people. Many actors have won Oscars for portraying real music stars, going back to things like Ray, and the list goes on and on and on. But Michael, it's interesting because if I had to compare the two, I think Michael is a better movie than Bohemian Rhapsody. For one, it had one director. Antoine Fuqua is a great director. But this exploration of Michael Jackson was never going to be as interesting as you would hope it to be. Some of that comes from the fact that the Jackson estate is involved. Of course they would be. They own his music. And in order to portray their brother, there is this idea, and I've seen this and I find it really interesting because I don't know if this is necessarily going to work, but the idea to sanitize Michael Jackson's history, and I don't actually think that's actually what the movie does. Unfortunately, someone who we know so well because of how long he was in the spotlight, what you would need to do to make this a really interesting and a worthwhile biopic as opposed to a collection of music videos is really explore the human that Michael Jackson was. I've seen Coleman Domingo talk about the fact that this is through Michael's eyes. And I push back on that slightly because I really don't think we truly get to understand who Michael was as a person. We get to see the first level in the onion, to quote Donkey. I guess not, it wouldn't be Donkey, it would be Shrek, that ogres are like onions. And I'm not comparing Michael Jackson to an ogre, but it's just in terms of the depth of the portrayal. It is very similar to how much we got to learn about Freddie Mercury. These people had complex lives, but the willingness to show that to an audience is very hesitant, of course, when all of your family is involved. And that does directly connect to who plays Michael in the movie. And I have to say that Jafar Jackson's portrayal of his own uncle is very cool to see. The meticulous, it's such a great word, but hearing about the investment in what he brought to this performance, I think Jafar is great for what the movie asks of him to do. That is to play Michael through a distinct era of his life, which is 1978 all the way through to 1988, which sounds like a lot of time and could present a cool film. However, what's really annoying is the movie seems as if it wants to check off specific sequences that most Michael Jackson fans would probably be aware of, that would be outside of probably the things that people would not want to see. And this may be considered a minor spoiler given where the film ends, but my favorite Michael Jackson song is Smooth Criminal. Smooth Criminal is not in the movie. And why I don't want to use that as my main gripe with the film, it is a little annoying because, of course, in the marketing, we've seen a lot of songs that are included in the picture. But choosing to evaluate Michael's life and give us... It's really annoying because Coleman Domingo is a phenomenal actor, Academy Award nominated actor, and his portrayal of Joe works perfectly in a way that you don't like Coleman Domingo. I love Coleman Domingo. He's great in so many different projects, but to truly be the villain in Michael's life, you need to not like Coleman Domingo. And he completely dives into who Joe was. Joe as a human being is somebody who has been quite villainized by the family posthumously. And to see the back and forth between Michael's willingness to support and love and care for his family, while also dealing with the overarching narrative of the control that Joe had over his life, and him breaking into the solo business, as we hear in the clips that will lead into the movie. And Jafar gets to do as much as the movie asks of him. But similar to the story presented overall in the film, the level of the exploration is not one in which where you're going to completely lose yourself and think this is Michael Jackson or this is somebody's version of Michael Jackson. Of course, being genetically related, there are physical similarities, and that does help in watching so much of this movie that recreates moments we are familiar with or maybe you're not familiar with. And the precision to which they recreate very significant moments in Michael Jackson's career are absolutely incredible. There's so much of Bohemian that reminds me of this movie, but specifically thinking about the way in which they recreated Live Aid, absolutely incredible. And there are moments, as we've seen, whether that be Motown 25, or the Bad tour or the Beat It music video, just seeing the level of physical dedication to truly recreate those moments and feel as if we're seeing them from entirely new angles is incredible. Unfortunately about that, though, that level of precision is not the way that they handled the overall story and the depths. It's just, I know I've said this probably already 3 times, but it's just frustrating because a biopic in general should present us with an exploration of that human being in a way that we've never seen them before. And with a public face like Michael Jackson, quite literally the king of pop, he owned a genre of music and, of course, became more and more synonymous with purchasing the Beatles catalog and all sorts of things, tabloid events, of course, paparazzi things that happened, and so much of that happens after the movie, and they've said in the press that this ends in 1988, before a lot of that stuff came out. And I really wanted to go out of this movie thinking, wow, this is a Michael Jackson like I've never seen before. But the sad part is most of this you probably have, because it's really focused on just sort of carrying you through the major events you likely are familiar with, maybe some that you're not, depending on your age, or showing you something that you know and love, and covering that nostalgia in a new 4K lens in the theater. And I can hear some of the pushback being, that's what this is going to be. Kyle, you're being overly critical. And I understand so many people who went into this, and there's been a conversation online about critics versus audiences, and I hate that argument because the best films and some of my favorite films can be beloved by both. You can be critical of something that happens to be fantastic, or a critic can love a movie just as much as audiences. Are there instances where I think critics miss the point? Absolutely. But this is one of those movies where you could have done both. There are biopics in which critics really loved them as well as audiences. One of my favorites is Rocket Man, which was positively reviewed by critics and positively reviewed by audiences. I'm pulling up the score right now just to confirm my argument, which is it is certified fresh at 89% and then popcorned at 88%. So that's a movie that is able to do both things, just be as entertaining as you suspect, but then also delivering on the well-crafted story and visuals. And another thing that does certainly help that movie stand out amongst a lot of the other biopics, and this is something that would have been really cool to use for Michael Jackson, but it probably would have been harder based on the lyrics that he uses in his songs, which is Rocket Man is a jukebox musical. Michael is probably better than Bohemian Rhapsody. Those are the two that really sort of scratch the same itch, or I would say they're I don't know. I'm also thinking about I Want to Dance with Somebody, the Whitney Houston one. And biopics have a very different challenge than so many other dramas. This movie is fun. I loved getting to see Thriller and Beat It and some iconic songs and their creation. What works most about this movie is the level of investment from the actors who are given anything to do. That is Michael and his parents and a couple supporting characters here and there. Unfortunately, though, any of the other Jacksons are just sort of there. Each major event that is used in the movie is not woven through effectively to feel as if it's a cohesive story. We have the major music video moments, we have what Michael was doing behind the scenes or how he created the song, and it just sort of feels hollow. That's what's incredibly frustrating is, yes, this movie had a certain amount of hurdles that it was going to overcome in creating the movie, whether that be telling us stuff that maybe we didn't know before, exploring deeper things in terms of Michael's relationships with his siblings, with his parents, whether that be creating the music, or his own issues with how he was treated. We just sort of mention it briefly and sort of move on to the next thing. Each of the musical moments in the movie isn't necessarily connected to what's going on. It's just sort of an unnecessary progression through time, and the jumps in time sort of happen at a breakneck speed. There is a moment in which there is a significant event in Michael's life, and we jump forward nearly 4 years just to the next thing. It doesn't really feel like a conclusion in any way to what had just happened. It just sort of ends abruptly. And that is, of course, a circumstance of what happened, which was they had to change the complete third act of the movie, which is frustrating. And I can get more into this in spoilers. And ultimately, that's where I'm left. The movie's frustrating because there's parts of it that are really well done and really significant entertainment for what it's trying to do. But the actual story will completely leave you wanting more if that is what you go to this for. And unfortunately, with a biopic, you're supposed to be telling an interesting story about that person, not just showing the flash and dash of their life. That will do it for non-spoilers. Now let's really get into the nitty-gritty with the spoilers for Michael.
I love my family, but I just want to do my own thing. Just have all these ideas in my head. Just gotta get them out.
Then do it, Michael. Not a little boy anymore.
We're now in full spoilers for Michael. The movie is essentially chopped up into thirds. The first third is seeing the history of the Jackson 5. And the most annoying part of this beginning, actually, is we see the drill sergeant, I wouldn't say Marine, but the way in which Joseph Jackson quite literally beat his children into submission to become this perfect boy band. And what's frustrating about that inclusion in it, seeing him quite literally beat Michael when he is unable to achieve this perfection that Joe has for them in order for them to garner fame and success and get them out of where they lived, is that sets the ground or the foundation for what could have been such a significant exploration of who Michael is and why Michael is who he is as a person. Not in a way in which it leans into what was originally going to be the third act, which was the investigation that happened in allegations in 1993, but why Michael is the way that he is. The movie explores Michael's lack of social ability with anybody his own age by briefly just sort of showing that he likes animals, and the way they show him around children is not in a way where it has any explanation whatsoever. We know from the beginning of this movie that Joseph Jackson is the bad guy in Michael's life, this dark force that pushed the boys into success, of course, getting signed by Motown, ultimately getting them out of Gary, Indiana, and they eventually found success. And Michael's connection to Berry Gordy leads him into eventually becoming a solo artist, signing with Epic, creating Off the Wall with Quincy Jones, who, by the way, is a minor character in this movie. You'd think in a movie that is obsessed with music, Quincy Jones would be a much bigger character. And if you do not know who Quincy Jones is, to everybody listening, do a Google. Maybe one of the most successful music producers in the history of music, but that's neither here nor there. And Michael's struggle with his solo career and the way in which they talk to us about it, it's just kind of there. He chooses to have a rhinoplasty just kind of out of nowhere. And if you know anything about Michael Jackson, we of course know that there was a lot of plastic surgery and this push for perfection. The movie tells you that in one line, and the next time you see Michael having had significant work done again is in the last 5 minutes when he performs the Bad Tour. Or no, it was called the Bad Tour. And that sequence is absolutely incredible, but the movie also, and this is slightly an annoying thing, where you can't ignore all of the changes that Michael made to himself with plastic surgery. But the movie sort of hides that version of Michael at the end of it, which is very weird because I read today that the bad tour sequence was the very first thing shot. So you created the final look for Michael in the movie in the beginning, but it's very rarely shown. All of the musical performances and Jafar's ability to completely inhabit the mannerisms of his uncle are absolutely stellar. When it comes to an actor disappearing into a role, and I say that slightly ironically because up until this, Jafar had never acted in anything, but clearly his natural given talents and abilities led to him getting this role. The commitment physically to be able to do all of that choreography is stunning. Those dance sequences and the music video moments, even some of the singing when apparently some of it is Jafar, were amazing. And that spectacle that you would expect from a Michael Jackson biopic are there. My issue is that it really feels inconsistent when the melodrama of trying to explore the struggles that Michael faced don't seem to be as eloquently designed. It feels like two different movies. You could also have used that as his exploration of who he is as a person, the safety net in which he felt safer performing than spending time with his own family. There were so many possibilities for what this could be, and what we wind up getting is a very mixed bag. I don't think this is worse than Bohemian Rhapsody. What I would love to know, and I haven't bothered to do this because quite frankly, I just haven't had time, is if there were critics, because I understand the push from audiences and moviegoers to think that critics are overly critical and can't have fun. I hope that with my opinions of all the movies I've reviewed, or the television series over 199 episodes, that I've explained it is okay to have fun with a movie. The overall delivery of that fun does matter in which it is presented to me. You can have a meaningful story with something that is equally as entertaining. Unfortunately, Michael is only a tale of one of those things. I really do feel, regardless of being able to explore the allegations around Michael's personal life, you could have spent, the movie is just over 2 hours, if you spent another 20 minutes, specifically between 1984 and 1988. Now, I don't know because I've not bothered to look into this because I'm watching this from a biopic, but parts of the movie, specifically with the conclusion of his relationship with Joseph, as well as the Jackson 5, just sort of feels like it happens. He gets pushed into doing this tour, leading to the Pepsi accident, and then he has the tour, says he's done with them, and then he goes to the bad tour. We get to, they spend so much time, and I get why you would, on Off the Wall and Thriller, and leading to the Billie Jean Motown moment, as well as how successful that album was. Thriller is still the most selling album of all time. But if we're going to spend time exploring the variety of which Michael was as an artist, I think it would have been really interesting to explore what ultimately led to the bad album and why Michael looked like that. We get to see the accident. It talks about his third-degree burns and the nerve damage he experienced. But it doesn't feel as if there is a natural evolution from the pre-accident to the bad Michael version, because it is obvious that there were more changes. And if you're gonna tell us that he has this idea of perfection and is constantly trying to change his physical appearance to achieve it, that should be an underlying theme throughout the entire movie and not one piece of dialogue. And that's what it is. If you gave us 20 minutes to show Michael on his own, exploring his own identity, and that's what's so frustrating. I do think Jafar could have done it. His commitment to the role is amazing. It is very reminiscent of Austin Butler dedicating himself to Elvis. And of course, you can talk about him having that accent forever. And it seems that Jafar has not done that with Michael, because that also is a very specific sound that he has to recreate while being Michael Jackson. And he does do that. There's been some talk as if this potentially could get him an Academy Award nomination. I really don't know. The Academy does absolutely love nominating actors who play real people. It's just something they appreciate. But the real interesting part of this to me is, if we in due fact get a sequel, what is that going to be? Are we going to see the Michael Jackson that was much more mixed or unbalancedly received later on? For legal purposes, they could not address the stuff from 1993. Quite literally, that's why they had to change the movie. But there is an entire decade of Michael Jackson's life that the movie could address, or it could not. It does seem that a sequel is likely because the movie does end with his story continues. I would like to see my favorite Michael Jackson song of all time, Smooth Criminal, portrayed, or even give us more from that era prior to the 1990s. What's most frustrating, and I find this incredibly annoying, is this idea that the movie tells us that Michael, and his mother says this to him, was born with a special light being shined on him, and he had this incredible potential. So did this movie. And it's unfortunate, really, at the end of the day, that it sort of winds up being a biopic, that it's not forgettable. I completely get people feeling that I'm being too critical. Kyle, just have fun. It's a Michael Jackson movie. But that's kind of the point. It's a Michael Jackson movie. You could have an incredible drama. The life this guy lived, being this little boy in a Jackson 5 group, 10 years old, #1 hit in the records, and then became an artist that was dubbed the King of Pop. And this movie is not one that's going to pop over and over. I really don't know. I'll be very curious to seeing what the second weekend is. Is the overwhelming positivity from audiences going to drive people in? I don't know. I really don't. Clearly, the reviews didn't negatively affect it, but time will tell if this winds up standing the test of time or not. That will do it for my spoiler thoughts on Michael. Now let's get to listener mail and question of the week responses.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was incredibly simple. What is your favorite Michael Jackson song? Scotty Cameron writes, favorite Michael Jackson song is probably Beat It. It's probably a sheep answer, but there's a reason it's really popular. Thriller is a favorite of mine as well because I love Ice Nine Kills cover. I've never actually heard that one. And Smooth Criminal is another favorite because I love Alien Ant Farm's cover. I do really love that cover as well, Scotty. And then Dylan wrote in, favorite Michael Jackson song is tough because there's so many obvious answers. I'll go more offbeat. He sings backup chorus on Rockwell's Somebody's Always Watching Me. I absolutely love that song, Dylan. Thanks so much for bringing it up because it is so great as a Halloween song. It's just so perfect for that. Obviously Thriller is as well, but those are some good choices. And the discography of this artist is absolutely incredible. And it's one that I could understand probably at least 20 songs being somebody's favorite. But thank you to the few who submitted their answers for question of the week. Now on to this week's question of the week, which is inspired by The Devil Wears Prada 2. What do you think the best outfit worn by a protagonist is in a film? So it could be a superhero costume, it could be the look of a regular person in a drama, but what outfit worn by a lead character blew you away? To let me know, you can comment below on YouTube and Spotify. you can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com, or you can at the social medias. Just make sure to include the hashtag QOTW. As I've said, next week's episode is going to be of The Devil Wears Prada 2, and it will also be episode 200 of the podcast. I can't believe that episode 200 is already here, and this is your last week to fill out the episode 200 questionnaire. So if you would like to support my look back at the history of the podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. If you are watching this on YouTube and you haven't liked the video or subscribed, please consider doing so. It would be absolutely incredible. It helps the podcast get into more algorithms and seen by more people, potentially on their front page. Next week's episode will be a review of The Devil Wears Prada 2 and episode 200. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you